Right. Thank you all. So now my chance to say something. First of all, I'd just like to thank Gail for chairing this morning's session and introducing where the CBA is to you, and to all the speakers. What we were really trying to do with their presentations was just really hear how archaeology has evolved and changed and its dynamic nature, particularly in the 80 years since the CBA was established in 1944. What I want to do now is give you my personal reflection on where I feel archaeology is, what it is to me. But I want to do this in a way that actually tries to answer this issue. For me, archaeology really needs to find its aspiration. Right, here we go. So, with permission from my beautiful, wonderful, and intelligent daughter, here is my daughter, Sophie Amelia Redfern. I have to say, my daughter has been the biggest influence on my philosophical approach to archaeology and heritage out of anyone I have ever known. My daughter taught me my most profound lesson in heritage and archaeology when she was aged 3. I was an inspector of ancient monuments at Historic England in Yorkshire, and I had to find a location that was acceptable to the good people of York for a Ferris wheel. They argued for 10 years why York should and shouldn't have a Ferris wheel. It eventually got a Ferris wheel on the year my daughter was born in 2005. Excellent. When she was 1.5, we went on the Ferris wheel. It was very, very exciting. She absolutely adored it. When she was 3, she said to me, "Daddy, I want to go on that Ferris wheel again." I said, "Great, let's go and have a look at it. Let's go and walk the dog by the river in York and look at the Ferris wheel." When we got there, the Ferris wheel had been half removed. They'd actually started taking it down. My daughter turned to me and she said, "Daddy, why are they taking my Ferris wheel away from me?" Because in my daughter's geography, York had never existed without a Ferris wheel. 10 years of arguing was entirely irrelevant to my daughter. Profoundly, what she taught me is there are no right answers in any of these games, because the next generation will have a different set of criteria they have to live by, and they'll have a different set of perceptions. So I don't believe in doing anything for the future. I actually don't really believe in celebrating the past. I am deeply embedded in the present, because it's the only place where I actually exist and I actually have a conversation. We need to ground ourselves in the present and everything that actually looks like. And I have to say, my daughter, bless her, she has been dragged all over the place since. So yes, that is how she looked when I tried to take her up a mountain on a rainy day. I have philosophically buried her with artifacts with her school friends. Yes, I've taken her in Ireland to visit Stooks when we saw them. This is a monumental moment in her life. And yes, she's been on archaeological sites, which literally said, "You are entering a scheduled ancient monument." I was so excited by this. But they said, "Do you have a permit to be here?" Obviously, I was the inspector, and I said, "Yes, Sophie, you do have a permit to be here." So my daughter is really fundamental in shaping some of those conversations about what it is we do and why we actually do it. And I've been really privileged to actually understand my own childhood through her eyes. That thing we never, ever get to do is to understand how we learned, how we shaped our feelings, how we shaped our approach to the world. And it makes me reflect a lot when I look at heritage and archaeology and the language and the issues we do. And I have to say, I have never come across another discipline that is so othering in our language, is so determined to try and fix and create authentic stuff, that we have a language and a narrative that creates what I have to say are the most substantial barriers to participation and engagement. If you want an example of this, you only have to look at the issues around statues. We can't deal with a complicated conversation, so we give it a title. It's contested heritage. We make a box which we put it in. We close the box and we just move it across and off the stage, rather than actually understanding how dynamic that conversation is, how powerful that conversation is, and actually understanding for some people in our society, this conversation is deeply traumatic, and that actually putting it in the box is the worst thing you can do to it. We need to unpack that box, or even better, act with empathy, get into the space with the people who find this stuff traumatic. It's really important that our processes and our language start to reflect this, and we start to enact different ways of operating. And language, for me, is a deeply, deeply important thing. Language matters. It has impact, and it can be deeply hurtful. But it's also a clear understanding of the barriers that are actually existing now to really good participation, to really good engagement. Barriers to living a thriving life within archaeology. I'm sorry, I don't see us creating a platform for people to thrive in archaeology. There's no recruitment crisis to me. There is a retention crisis. There is a crisis around whether we actually can afford to exist to do this industry that we've actually created. What does that mean? And I mean that from the ability to actually introduce and allow other voices to come in. For the CBA, this is really important in actually how we approach everything we do. We have 3 overriding issues that sit at the back of all of our concepts. The first is around representation. We are not representative of society. The second is around legacy. We've got to understand the legacy of how archaeology has been used in the past, how archaeology continues to be used, that impact of language. And then we need to understand the issues of othering. And what they come down to is really understanding how we create a better sense of belonging in archaeology. For me, this is actually how anyone can come forward and use archaeology as a philosophical approach to ask questions about the places in which they live. We really need to do more to create that process. And I'm sorry, I sometimes don't think the focus on process has actually got us down that line. Indeed, I think it's made us more incapable of creating a sense of belonging with archaeology in the UK. And where I want to finish on this is a real sense of actually understanding that archaeology and heritage in the UK, to me, has placed itself in a philosophical cul-de-sac. And what we really need to do is get out of this cul-de-sac. And that needs radical reimagination of what it is and who we are. And I liken the philosophical cul-de-sac to well, let's go to Harry Potter, actually. He's the only person who can help me out here. And the philosophical cul-de-sac can best be described as the unforgivable curses. Okay, and they are preservation, finite and non-renewable resource, and the idea it's not heritage until it's on a list, until it's been boxed off, confirmed, and neatly put in its place. To me, they absolutely crush individual sense of belonging in heritage and in archaeology. So I really want us to reimagine that. And I have 2 ways, and I think we should actually do that. The first is around archaeology's role in place shaping. We are place shapers. We are memory makers. And maybe if we actually understood archaeology as the process by which we create the collage of place, memory, and meaning, we can take all those aspirations around outreach, around public engagement, and make them more real. In many ways, by having those terms, we're othering. But what we really need to do is self-center this back in the human process. And that is actually about owning and understanding some of the trauma that is actually associated with heritage and archaeology. Indeed, I would love archaeologists to wake up tomorrow and say, I'm a therapist of deep time. And what do I mean by that? Well, actually, archaeologists study the process of human failure, often human tragedy. Okay? But yet what we do is we enter into the world of happy heritage, and we've got to tell happy, exciting stories about the past. Yet sometimes what we're really dealing with is trauma in the past reflected in the material that we encounter. But we're not very good at telling those stories. So actually, if we better understood the society we live in today, we would actually tell better stories about the past, be able to create a better sense of belonging, and really live that process of being the therapists of deep time. Because if we're the therapists of deep time, we can introduce a reflective practice in what we do that makes us able to address the issues of society today. And this is where my daughter comes back into my conversation. She's now 18. She's now at her first year of university. And at 16, she referred to me quite openly as the pre-Google generation. Now she goes one step further and says, "Dad, you're utterly irrelevant. You were born in the 1900s. Why is this important? Well, people from the 21st century are now entering our workforce, and they have a completely different perspective on life. Why? Because they are shown the trauma of this world every single hour of every single day on their mobile devices. These people have a completely different perspective on what the world is throwing at them today. And so actually we need to understand the place they occupy if we are really to create meaningful meaningful ways of approaching archaeology in the future and what that actually means. And I have to say, we're really delighted. One of our youth advisory board, Eva, is going to be on our panel in a moment. Eva is going to be the only person born in the 21st century on our panel. The first person I've known to be on a panel from the 21st century. Okay? This is going to be a big change that comes in as this generation starts to enter the workforce. I often liken it to the 1920s, when you actually had that post-Victorian generation come in. And if you looked at the energy and the vibrancy of the early 1920s, we've got a real opportunity to see something here when we actually look at it. But we've got to listen to them, we've got to value them, and we've got to empower them.